Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to engage on this topic. I want to add some perspectives from women from the Global South to this discussion. And I think for us, the best way to understand if the HLPF has been successful in implementing its mandate and what is working and what isn't in terms of stakeholder engagement is to really take stock of whether we are being represented and if our issues are being heard in the implementation and the review of the SDGs. And I think the procedural elements in that way can't be discussed in complete isolation from the substantive, or we can't ignore the corporate and state capture of the United Nations, which also affects how these processes happen. And we also have to remember that the HLPF modalities discussion is also happening amidst many other parallel discussions around reforming the UN, and the impact of those on how the HLPF takes shape for the next cycle also have to be taken into account. So the mandate of the HLPF, first and foremost, is to provide political leadership in the implementation, follow-up, and review of this process. And this includes the integration of the three dimensions of sustainable development, and then around policy and institutional coherence, and that one word that is deliberately left out of this agenda, accountability. So I want to address these with recommendations on what states can do and what we as civil society can do as we move forward. So when we talk about interlinkages, it's a term that is kind of like big data. We all use it, but I think we lack a common understanding of what it really means. And I think we have to ensure that there are clear guidelines on interlinkages, its languages and best practices that are developed and adopted by governments, UN agencies, civil society, and all other stakeholders. And currently the treatment of interlinkages, especially when providing guidance to member states, like through the VNR handbook, is merely cosmetic. And a main reason for this is that we are not grounding interlinkages in human rights. And I think the MGOS, for an example, can recognize and tap into the richness of the groups that constitute it and take the lead in cross-movement knowledge building, including language and best practices. And then the UN agencies in turn need to incorporate these into how member states are guided in both the implementation and the reporting. And one example I can bring here is the fact sheets that are prepared by the Women's Major Group every year that look at the interlinkages beyond the mere links and examines the structural impediments that affect the implementation and achievement of the SDGs. So for an example, this year you will see there are papers being developed around energy, around water, and how they relate to women's human rights. Then when we talk about coherence, we do need improved and clearer connections and linking between all these areas of the VNRs, and I think the other colleagues here have talked about them in lots of different ways. And I think one of the most important things is that we need the links between the regional SDGs forums and the HLPF to be less tenuous. And the outcomes of the regional forums should have a bigger role in shaping the ministerial declaration and the collective political commitment. And I think right now, when we walk into this space with the ministerial declaration already in a draft format, there is really, we don't see a lot of space to do that. And there are colleagues here from the regional CSO engagement mechanisms who would be able to actually add more to this. And the other point about coherence is that we've heard it come up from different people about the human rights processes. How do we make sure that they are not separated from the implementation of the and the review of the SDGs? And my own work focuses on harmonizing the human rights framework with the sustainable development framework. And we have been doing side-by-side comparisons of how member states are reporting in these two frameworks. And I'll take my country, Sri Lanka, as an example. So they're representing the VNR this year. And last year, Sri Lanka reported to the CEDAW committee. And if you look at the state obligations under CEDAW, the state legal obligations, those are much broader and deeper in scope than, say, SDG 5 on gender equality, which means that all of the targets and indicators in SDG 5, as well as any cross-cutting indicators, are covered through these obligations. But when you look at the report, the gender equality chapter is literally one page, and it does not make a link with what was reported to CEDAW. And you will see that the Voluntary People's Report that has been developed by the civil society actually covers a lot more of that scope. So a redesign or reform of HLPF has to then take into account how the human rights framework can be better integrated and beyond the general inputs that are being made by treaty bodies at the moment. And the last thing I want to talk about is accountability. So 2 points. One is around stakeholder engagement. And I think stakeholder engagement really has to respond to the political realities of our countries, because space for civil society is fast eroding in our countries, and we need better guidelines and understanding of what stakeholder engagement means so that it's not just a tick in a box. So one recent example comes from Egypt, where there is a heavy crackdown on civil society and human rights defenders, and the government shared a Google form as a mechanism to get CSOs to provide feedback to the VNR. So technically, they have done what needs to be done to get this input, but in that form, one of the required fields was for the person giving input to provide their national identification number. So if you or your work is already under attack, then this kind of information would dissuade you from engaging with the process, and that is really what happened there. And the other point on accountability is, of course, our own as civil society. I think it's really important to discuss who gets access to these spaces and gets to engage with the HLPF as much as we talk about the shrinking space and how things are going backwards. Who gets ECOSOC or CSD status? Who has resources? Who can't engage at the UN due to state and corporate capture? You know, what are the things we can't talk about in this space? So we need processes that link local and experiences to global processes in a much better way. And if we are going to ensure this, then these negotiations on modalities have to be centered on marginalized groups of people. So those are the things I wanted to say, and I think holding the realities of people and our planet are at the center of this agenda, and it's critical that when we talk about processes, we don't lose out on that. Thank you.